Howdy, folks. Welcome to part two of A Beginner's Guide to Public Speaking with me, Jack McCurdy, and Peter Chittum. We are going to cover in this section how to ideate on your public speaking session. So it's great that you have taken this step and said to yourself, I want to do a talk. I want to do a presentation at a conference. I want to present internally. But the question that many people find themselves asking, and I certainly found this when I first started submitting to conferences, was what should I talk about and would anyone actually care about what I have to say? Peter, thoughts on anybody with this conundrum?
Yeah. Well, so, you know, the best talks are the talks that are personal, right? So if you are, let me put that a different way. Whatever you are doing, the best thing to do is to keep an open mind and to have in the back of your mind that this is something that you want to undertake. You want to undertake sharing a presentation. And so as you go about the process of your work, your life, what's great about a lot of the community conferences is, if there is a life lesson that you can take and apply to your job, like that's often fodder for a presentation. So, I would say the best thing that you can do to begin ideation is to kind of put yourself in the mindset for it and think, what is something that has meant something to me or that I have done or that I've experienced? And is there a story to tell there?
I wholeheartedly agree. Some of the best presentations that I've seen, and I'm going to talk about keynotes here specifically. If you go to a conference and you hear a keynote presentation, 9 times out of 10, that keynote presentation is that person's personal experience. And they weave the personal experience through the subject matter expertise or specific scenario or learning outcome that they've had. But it is their personal journey and that perspective. Everybody has unique perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you can learn from unique perspectives, the richer everybody becomes, I think. And
yeah, absolutely.
That's one of those things. I think one of the recommendations that I had for people when we were writing this guide was keep a diary of what you've done. It doesn't need to be a daily diary, but key moments in your journey where you thought that was tough, but I figured it out, or that's had a really profound impact on me. Something that you might have picked up 3 months ago and you started implementing and practicing it. Where were you 3 months ago and where are you now because of that thing that you started doing? And those little moments where you need a reminder. It's not all going to stay in our heads. We're busy people. We have a lot of priorities. Context switching quite a lot of the time. If you have a diary of things to refer back to, things that are second nature to you now weren't second nature to you before, and taking that personal journey and how it has evolved over that time is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's important to remember, especially the moment that you have the idea is very likely to predate the moment that you're prepared to talk about it. So, that the idea for a talk may come at the beginning of a project, and you realize that you're working on maybe a feature you've never worked on before or a new feature that's recently been released. That's the moment to, in that diary, and I have something that I just have a document that's called Talk and Blog Ideas, and I just dump. Anytime I have an idea, I use Apple Notes pretty profusely because they're on my phone, they're on my laptop, they're everywhere, and they persist everywhere, and they're very lightweight. So it's I don't have to go in and open Google Docs and like find a doc. It's a note. It's searchable right from either the Finder search on my Mac or, from my phone, so it's really easy to get to. And then I can just jot down the few words about the idea and, some thoughts. And then I just, park it. And, when I'm beginning to think about what are some opportunities to speak about, then I can just go back to that document. So diary, absolutely, that's great. Or just a dumping ground for ideas, some way or the other. Our memories. I've been reading this book called The Memory Illusion, and our memories aren't meant to keep things in context for longer than a few seconds, actually. So as soon as you can jot that down, you may get that idea back, but just in case you don't, get it written down and then come back to it.
The amount of times I have been in situations where and it's cliche, but the amount of times I've been in the shower and I've thought, that's a brilliant idea. Like, I should remember that. I should write that down. And I come to write it down or revisit. What was that great idea I had in the shower earlier? And it's not there anymore. Yeah. And very rarely does it come back unless I am in that moment where it sparked or I had the freedom to think, you're in the shower, you're not doing anything else, like ideas kind of flow. Same if you're out for a walk or even driving, especially right. On a long drive, you switch off and your mind kind of goes to other places when you're on the motorway or the highway and your mind's taking you to other places. See what you can do, record a quick voice note for yourself and come back to it. And those initial blossoms that you have of an idea are what you ruminate on and you nurture and grow into the full tree, which will become a well-presented talk. Speaking of well-presented talks, it's important to think about audience as well, Peter, something that you wrote down for our guide.
Yeah.
Perfectly planned, written talk, executed is rubbish if it's to the wrong audience.
Exactly. Yeah. Audience is everything. And, as soon as you have the idea, you should be thinking about who is the ideal audience. It's the same reason why we don't go building software features unless we have the persona, or the user story about that, or the job to be done. And all of those are based around the person. Your talk is about helping somebody with something that, you're connecting with them and you are giving them something. And so, the importance of audience comes down to everything about your talk, not just what goes into it, but also how you propose it and, how you communicate about it. Because in the end, you're going to go into a conference room that's going to seat somewhere between 20 and 200 people. And you want to make sure, every single person that has come into that room, and is taking up a seat is the right person to hear that talk. And we'll come back to that when we're building the talk as well, because, I think there's some important key things that you can do as you're building your talk that can help make that better on the day when you present it. So yeah, audience. It shapes everything that you do from ideation forward.
Yeah. If you're a business analyst, speak to business analysts. If you're an admin, speak to admins. If you're a developer, speak to developers. If you are an architect, speak to architects. People will come to your talk if you have them in mind.
Yeah, and I would broaden it just a little bit because, I don't have to be a very experienced architect to be able to tell a story that will resonate with architects, right? But I do need to understand enough about that persona, or if I don't know it when I get the idea, to go and research and do some testing out, get some trusted advisors who do have that expertise to make sure that I am in the right vein and I'm hitting that audience correctly. And I'll give you an example of that. One of the talks I've given the most in my life that's had several different iterations, is a talk where I go and talk about how to use the command line, but it is very very focused on Salesforce administrators as the audience. Certainly a Salesforce developer, when I first created the talk, Salesforce developers hadn't been in the habit of using command line tools. So this is back in 2016-ish was about it was about the time, well, no, it was when the Salesforce DX features were getting first rolled out into the product. There had never been an officially supported Salesforce command line before. There had been a few open source tools that the community had built, but command line interaction with an org just did not exist. And the reality is command line is super easy to use. It is the way that everybody interacted with computers, actually, until GUIs became the way. Now, there's probably a reason why, computer usage was maybe not as widely adopted. But, fundamentally, the premise of my talk was, if you understand how to write a Salesforce formula, you can use the command line, because functions in a formula field or in a validation rule share many of the same behaviors and characteristics as commands on a command line. So that was kind of the premise of the talk. Now, I gave that talk a couple of times, and then I went and I presented it to Mike Gerholtz just as a one-on-one to get some feedback from him. Mike Gerholtz he leads the admin evangelist team at Salesforce. And he gave me a few suggestions that made that talk so much better and so much more relevant for Salesforce administrators. And that's kind of what I mean is, I hadn't quite done all of the work in getting it initially out there, even though I got some really great responses for it. Once I went to somebody who was steeped in being a Salesforce administrator and understood that audience even better than I did, it got that much better. So you don't necessarily need to be the persona, but you need to empathize with them, and you need to go the distance to understand them and to reach them if that's not your own personal lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the points I had was what consistent themes are coming up in your conversations at work or with the community or those types of personas, and that can really help you nail down what people are caring about in the moment, what they are finding valuable, or the struggling moments that they have. And if you have something to share that is relevant and consistent with those themes and frequent conversations that are coming up, then that's great too. The other thing is, Peter, you've talked just now about talks from a technical perspective and using a command line and writing Salesforce functions, very technical things. Your talks don't have to be technical either. So
absolutely.
One of the talks that I have coming up, it is April 2025. So if you're watching this in 2026 or 2027, this will have already been done. But this year at Texas Dreaming, one of the two sessions that I'm presenting is called Communicate Confidently with Slack. And that presentation is about, so I've used Slack now for 6 years, and over the last 6 years, it's become really clear how important written communication is in a business context. We use Slack for everything here at GearSet, and learning to embrace written communication and understanding how different people receive written communication, punctuation, emojis, and all those kind of things is really important. And those soft skills when you're interacting, not just on Zoom calls, many of you are probably on Zoom calls all day, every day, especially if you're a consultant, but that written communication in Slack specifically, the talk's going to go into a couple of the features in Slack that have made my life easier and make information sharing easier as well. So there will be an element of technicality to the talk.
Sure.
However, the inspiration for the talk is through some of my interactions on Slack and how they have shaped how I communicate more clearly and how to make sure things don't get lost in translation. So it doesn't have to be, your talk doesn't have to be about the command line. It doesn't have to be about flow. It doesn't have to be about Apex. It can be around some of those power skills, if you like.
I love it. Slack patterns. So if you're watching this in the future, go check out that recording. Provided they record it at Texas Dream.
Yeah, we'll see. But how to ideate? Any other suggestions
Well, we
for
have this
folks here?
list, so I mean, I think it's not a bad idea. Like, we could just maybe run through it as a lightning round and say a few words about each one. And I think you had the first three, and I had the last four. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right.
So, I mentioned it at the start of this video. What do you wish you'd known 6 or 12 months ago? What has been helpful or fruitful? Or what do you know now that you wish you'd known at the beginning of a project or a piece of work? That's something that I think will be helpful for everybody. Give people a leg up before they start on the thing that you've already started and completed, and share your challenges and journeys.
Yeah.
Similarly to that, what problem did you just solve that others might face too? Much along a similar line. And I mentioned it already, but what consistent themes are coming up in conversations at work or in the community? You're at a user group, and again, it's April 2025. Everybody's talking about Agent Force. What challenges are people having with new emerging technologies, or what's really of interest? What is pertinent to our lives right now that you see and have some experience or tangible thoughts on, that you can put together and present back to an audience that is experiencing similar things?
Yeah, those are all so key because, if you've thought of it, or if it's bugged you, and someone else has thought of it, or it's bugged somebody else too, and that's always a guarantee. So then, some of the things that I thought were look ahead to emerging technologies. Some of the best ideas I've had were knowing that something was coming and reading that ahead of time. Like, what are people going to need to know? Yeah, there's a couple of talks that I've given along those lines, and actually the command line talk was one of those. Also, core skills. There are always newcomers to the platform. There are always newcomers, and so even though there've maybe been 10 talks on Apex patterns or bulkification in Apex, there's somebody who just started using Apex yesterday that hasn't seen one of those. And if you come up with a way to talk about that works for you, that's great. What's different about that talk and everybody else's talk about bulkification in Apex is you. So bring you to the table and share that.
Yeah, something that I would say on that as well. One of the talks that I have done consistently for the last 3 years is an admin's guide to Git. And even though I've been giving the presentation for 3 years, it's not a new concept to me. It's
Right.
going to be new from so many people.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. And something I struggle with when I'm ideating is what's new to me, and what new things can I talk about. I've talked this thing to death, I feel like, but it's not to death to the majority of your audience. You will still pull audiences in for things that have existed for a long time.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Always, if you have an idea, or like a cool way of thinking about it, or something that, even if it's just like a new way of thinking about it that you've not heard anyone else share, go with it, give it a try. Now, I also put down foundational skills, and those are a little bit different, I think, than core skills. I mean, core skills, I think, are like the core skills that we use with the product directly. Foundational skills are things that help you understand why you're doing things better. And I think I love these talks. I saw one of the best talks I saw at TDX this year was one that talked about how the Atlas reasoning engine that's behind Agent Force was built. And it gave me much better grounding to understand what are the different pieces, how have they woven together different pieces of AI to come up with this reasoning engine. A corollary to that could be, if you have, maybe you have core database theory that you think will help admins do better data modeling using Salesforce objects. That could be a really useful talk. Maybe you have some core, like some foundational analytics skills that will help Salesforce admins build better reports. Like, those are the kind of things where if you have some background in something, and then you've come to Salesforce and you're seeing how Salesforce does it, and you think that you have some background information that can help people do that better, those are great. Those are some of my favorite kinds of talks, because because we live in Salesforce that kind of tries to abstract away all of the gnarly bits of technology, understanding those gnarly bits can make you better with Salesforce in some cases. And then the last one I would say is, have you taken a class recently and learned something? And there's a talk that I've been giving recently about core machine learning technology. That's based on me having taken a machine learning class. And I still am not using machine learning every day in my job, but I think it's really important to understand basic machine learning models. And I've been sharing that talk, and I get a lot of good feedback from that. So, if you've gone and taken a class and learned something, is there something that you took from that class that you can then take and sort of share with the world? Um, those are all ideas or places where you can go to ideate.
There you have it, folks. How to ideate 101. Hope you've enjoyed.